Okay. Thank you for that. And yeah, we'll be sending you like a recording of the training for your reference. So in the next slide, we'd like to share with you that we consider our tourism sector as both victim and contributor to climate change. So while the sector's footprint has been steadily increasing, many of our so-called tourism hotspots are becoming more and more vulnerable to the effects of climate change. What with the recent typhoons, right? So with the pandemic still ongoing up till now, an international call for a green recovery for the tourism sector ensued. The call highlights better conservation and sustainable management of our natural tourism destinations such as beaches, oceans, mountains, parks, and forests, which is seen as vital to reduce GHG emissions. So part of this global movement to answering this call is of course our Transforming Tourism Value Chains project, a UNEP-led project that seeks to reduce GHG emissions and increase resource efficiency in high resource tourism sectors in developing countries and small island developing states, namely Dominican Republic, Philippines, Mauritius, and St. Lucia, through capacity building workshops such as this one, of course, policy recommendations, research, and information campaigns to, of course, stimulate change within the sector. So, in the next slide for our webinar today, we will celebrate and encourage conversation on the role of women, not just in the tourism industry, but also as protectors in the fight against climate change. So, again, in the next slide, showing the agenda. So, did you know that women make up the majority of the tourism workforce, which means more women were particularly you can say vulnerable or had job insecurity when a lot of travel restrictions were imposed during the height of the pandemic. So women also tend to be concentrated in the lowest paid and lowest status jobs in tourism. So considering these issues, the tourism sector has a great opportunity to enhance gender equality and women's empowerment by providing job opportunities and skills development. So for this webinar, we ask ourselves, how can we extend existing initiatives and programs in gender and development and apply these concepts in the tourism sector in the Philippines to promote inclusive job opportunities and develop policies that are more gender responsive? So I'm glad to share that we have our gender and development experts today who can help us address this issue. So they will be helping uncover existing policies and programs that advocate gender balance in the tourism sector here in the Philippines. We also want to discuss how tourism businesses can identify and provide opportunities for women in the sector. And lastly, share information about on the ground experiences of women empowerment and leadership in tourism and disaster risk reduction management. So, tackling our objectives for today's webinar, as you can see on the screen, will be speakers from none other than the Asian Institute of Management, Dr. Andrew L. Tan Center for Tourism, Fora Communications, and Kasarian Kalayaan, or Sarilaya. So please do pay attention to what our speakers have to say, take notes, ask lots of questions in time for our open forum later on. So, for our first speaker, providing us with an overview of opportunities for gender equality in the tourism sector, is an old friend. She is a development consultant and the research manager at the Asian Institute of Management's, of course, as I said before, Dr. Andrew L. Tan Center for Tourism. She is also a senior consultant at Warwick and Rogers and the Sustainable Tourism Specialist of the Masungi Geo Reserve Foundation, Inc. So prior to this, she served as an intern at the National Green Growth Policy and Green Local and Regional Economic Development under the Green Economic Development at the GIZ, at the Fleischmann Hillard Manila, and at the Conrad Adenauer Stiftung Philippines. So she has completed her master's in development policy and Bachelor of Arts International Studies, major in European Studies, magna cum laude in De La Salle University, Philippines. So everyone, please welcome Miss Ayla Lair Gutierrez. Ayla, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you very much, Andy. So let me just, I'm not allowed to share my screen. Can you guys enable?
Oh, yeah. Okay, all set.
Yeah, so I'll try to, there you go. Okay. So again, good afternoon, everyone. Magandang hapon, good morning, or good evening, wherever part of the world you're in. Again, I am Ayla Gutierrez, Research Manager at the Asian Institute of Management, Dr. Andrew L. Tan Center for Tourism. And today, I'll be talking about a topic that's actually close to my heart. I'm actually doing, I guess, a more personal research in this topic. So what today's discussion will talk about are some of the insights and some of the observations that I've had during my field work across the Philippines and different tourism destinations in the Philippines. But today's session, I would call it more of a crash course, I would say, because the topic is very broad and I believe other speakers would agree to that. So let's see what we can learn in the next 15 minutes or so. So for my presentation, I'll talk about 5 things. Hopefully it fits the 15-minute mark. So first, we'll talk about the very contentious topic or term gender equality. What does it actually mean? I mean, you've probably heard of it in several books, magazines, or whatever documentaries, but let's try to put it in a simpler manner, one that we can easily digest and understand, right? Second, and we'll talk about situating gender equality and women in tourism. I think Andy has already mentioned some of the statistics, but we'll try to further expound what those numbers actually mean in reality. How does this translate to the actual experience of women? And third, I'll open up about the existing debate on gender equality, because I believe that this will help us understand better how we can, as individuals, as business owners, as government employees, can actually help in promoting gender equality in the industry. And of course, it's important to also talk about the challenges that women face. And finally, most importantly, bulk of my presentation will talk about what can we actually do, right? What can we do as our own humble individual citizens of the country? What can we actually do to help promote or instill gender equality, right? So without further ado, let me start. So what does gender equality actually mean, right? Basically, if you try to Google it, there's really no straightforward definition to it. Like, I even had a hard time looking for it. But I guess the closest and most simple way of describing gender equality is that it's a characteristic of a society wherein people, regardless of your gender, your sexual orientation, you have equal rights, responsibilities, and opportunities. Okay, that's quite simple. But what does it actually mean? Basically, this means that your rights, responsibilities, opportunities, the decisions that you make, how you wanted to act and decide towards the world or about yourself should not depend on whether you are born a male or a female. So simply, you can decide, you can take on jobs and responsibilities whether you are born male or female. It's not a factor that should be a problem to you, right? But in reality, we know that this might be more difficult to implement and more difficult to see in societies than, what is said in this definition. So why are we now talking about women in the tourism sector? As Andy has mentioned, for years now, I mean, like, we're talking about 10 to 20 years now, the tourism industry has been lauded for the economic opportunities it provides to women. Because actually, if you look at the numbers, you would see that more than half of the tourism workforce globally are actually women. And yes, that's a lot of women involved in the industry, right? So if we look at the Asia Pacific region, we would see that also more than half of the population of the tourism workforce are actually also comprised of women. But if we look at the Philippines, again, these are rough estimates, but we would see that it's much lower than half of the tourism workforce that we can observe globally in the Asia Pacific region. In fact, we are lagging behind in terms of Thailand, Indonesia, and Myanmar's women tourism workforce, who are comprising 50+% or half of the population. And to me, this is puzzling because the fact is the Philippines is already recognized internationally by several organizations that it is actually the top Asian country in terms of gender equality. And in the Asia Pacific region, we're actually second next to New Zealand in terms of being able to bridge the gender gap. So the question that immediately popped into my head is, first, why are only a few women involved in tourism in the Philippines? Is it because they do not like the working environment in the tourism and hospitality industry? Or is it because the hospitality and tourism industry aren't open to women working in the industry, right? So this question is actually noted and has actually been suggested not just by me, but by several researchers and development practitioners across the globe. And this is where the debate comes into the picture. The question really is on whether tourism industry, despite employing a lot of women, um, does this actually translate to the industry promoting progress? Meaning, does it mean that a lot of women are working industry? Does it actually equate to them um, making economic progress because they are employed economically, right? Or does it mean that the industry is just proliferating or exacerbating the already highly gendered industry? Meaning, does the industry just play along with the existing gender stereotypes instead of changing them? So I guess the main question really is, if we talk about the Philippines tourism industry, is it enough to increase the number of women in the industry? Does it mean that, okay, sige, 70% of women in the Philippine tourism industry are actually women? Is that enough to say that, hey, we're actually gender equal? Or the bigger question is, does the quantity of women involved in tourism actually translate to the quality of the work that they do, the quality of life that they have working for the industry, right? And this is where I try to expand gender equality to encompass the concept of empowerment. Meaning, again, the question is whether women's involvement or participation in industry actually translate to them feeling empowered or with them having better lives at that point, right? And this is where majority of my research comes into the picture. It's really questioning whether the quantity of women actually translate to the quality of the work that they do in the tourism industry. Because if you will go out of your home, you will go to a hotel, to a restaurant, you would see a lot of women, right? But the big question is this the quality of work that they actually deserve, right? So with that, let me present to you quickly how I try to summarize the work field research that I've conducted in several tourism destinations in the Philippines. So far I've been to Palawan and Cebu and across Metro Manila. So investigating women's work in the tourism and hospitality industry. And what I found out in doing this brief research is that in achieving gender equality in the tourism industry, there are two things that needs to be addressed. First is women's participation. Because this is what most of us are advocating, no? That there should be more women in the industry, more job opportunities for them. But beyond that, no, another component that we often forget is that the job that they are involved in should be able to empower them. There should be quality in the work that they do. And when we talk about empowerment, we talk about women being involved in tourism and making sure that the work that they do actually contributes to the improvement of their self-perception, their self-confidence, and their mental well-being. We have to make sure that the work that we offer to women also is accepted by the community, that it is something that, okay, women work in the hospitality and tourism industry. Is this accepted by their family? Does this improve their social standing? Do they have better community relations because of their work, right? Because there are some work that are not approved by the community per se, right? Next, we have to also make sure that the work that women do also allow them to have the voice in decision making. Are women employed in managerial and leadership positions, right? We have to also question that. Next, we also have to make sure that when women do participate, economically, they're not just given employment opportunities, but they're also given entrepreneurial opportunities that allow them to become independent economically, meaning that they can decide where their money goes and they can decide whether this money is enough for their family and, of course, to provide for their own personal needs, right? Because we cannot equate women's economic needs to their family needs, because these are, independent aspects of economic independence, right? And all in all, my proposition is that when we ensure tourism participation, when we ensure gender equality, this means that women are empowered enough to be able to contribute to their community and the entire industry's development. Because it's not enough to employ women, right? They have to be employed in quality work, in work that actually means to them, that actually improves their well-being as well, right? Because in reality, women face a lot of challenges in working in the industry. Like, for example, challenges that I would like to share some of the insights that I've learned in my field work as well, right? For example, gender wage gap is still a thing. I don't know if you have experiences of this as well, but you would note that UNWTO already noticed that globally, women earn 14.7% less than men. And I'm talking about you as women, myself, no? Working for the same position, same responsibilities, same, I guess, job requirements, no? But I'm earning less just because I'm a woman, right? And of course, that's obviously unfair. And we see this in several occasions, right? Even in the corporate setup, there are a lot of studies that show that this is still a thing, even in the Philippines, that women earn less just because they are women. Next, we talk about glass ceilings. Glass ceilings are invisible limitations for women to be engaged in managerial and leadership positions. Because in reality, women are still regarded as less competent and less fit for management and leadership positions. And again, this has little to do with their skills and their knowledge, but more of them becoming women. So these are glass ceilings that we're talking about. Next, as noted by Andy a while ago, women, unfortunately, even in the Philippines, are still concentrated in seasonal, low-skilled, and underpaid positions. In fact, in some of the areas that I've visited, I've noticed that in tourism establishments that are considered small scale and are family businesses, women are often unpaid. Hindi sila binabayaran at all, because their family thinks that the work that they do are mere extensions of what is domestically expected of them to do. Meaning, if they are in charge of, for example, a lodging establishment, if they are cleaning the house or the lodging, if they're cooking for the lodging, then the mindset of the family is that you don't need to get paid for, because that's what you already do at home, right? So there are instances wherein this is still the case in a lot of tourism establishments, unfortunately. Next, informal burden. This is something that's been existing since 1970s, I would say, because when I looked at the literature, they would say that this has been existing. And unfortunately, this has been also validated by the findings that I've had in some of the field work that I did. So there still is informal burden. When we talk about this informal burden, we talk about, for example, double burden. Double burden wherein women, yes, okay, we're working economically, we share the economic burden of raising a family. But the question is the domestic responsibility, taking care of the household, of the family members, cooking for the family, cleaning the house, is it actually shared by their husbands? Is it actually shared by the male members of their family? So again, this exacerbates the burden, because imagine you're already tired working, and yet you have to take charge of your household after a long working day, right? And this is further exacerbated by what we call a triple burden, wherein on top of the domestic and economic burden that women already face, there still is a community issue wherein, for example, we know for a fact that, for example, in barangays, when we organize, for example, feeding programs or fiestas or get-togethers, it's usually the women who are taking charge of everything. It's usually the women who liaise or who interact with other community members to make sure that their family is still accepted by the community in a way. So again, this exacerbates the already existing economic and domestic burden that's not automatically shared with the male counterpart of their household. So again, this is something that's usually unsaid and statistically not represented, but still is a challenge for women in the industry. And I'm sure, pretty sure, in other industries as well. And finally, to my surprise, now there are still issues of acceptance of women's economic participation. There are still areas wherein women, and even if they are earning enough for their families, even if they are happy with the work that they do, oftentimes they stop working because their family members, the community to where they are belonging, does not approve of them um joining the economic activities, right? So still, no, the culture, the norms that suggest that women should remain at home and take care of their families, no, are unfortunately still being upheld in a lot of communities and families that of course hinder women's economic participation, right? So I'm pretty sure that I just opened up a Pandora's box, and there still are a lot of challenges that women face in the industry and in other industries. And I'm pretty sure you could raise your hand and talk about how you've probably noticed some of these issues as well personally, no? But of course, for the spirit of this webinar, we want to talk about what we can actually do um, to help ease these challenges. What are some of the opportunities that are there in the industry, and how we can make sure that these opportunities are actually that these opportunities actually happen or accrue, right? So for what can we do at, I would call, the micro level, at an individual level? If you were a manager of a business or of an organization, I hope that you're in the position to hire based on competency and skills and not just gender. In one of the interviews that I've conducted with TESDA, for example, they've noted that to their surprise, imagine, they were surprised that women were better welders than men. No, because our mindset in the Philippines, no, pag welders, it's just men, no? Men should do the welding, no? Even in construction jobs, it's usually men who are involved in welding activities. But that's the notice that when they did a competition on welding, no, they noticed that it's actually women who are better welders than men because of their innate ability for being keen to details. No, so again, no, let's try to, when we talk about hiring, let's not be biased in terms of the gender of what society is assigned, what society has assigned for women or men to do, but instead let's focus on their skills and competencies. And again, if you want an example of that, then imagine the welders, no? That again, that is beyond the characteristics of what society entails to be what women is, right? Second, again, if you are in the position to have a say or to at least have your opinion stated in your own company and organization, we need to be able to support the skills and capacities of both men and women. I think at the end of this is actually education, no? Educating, changing the curriculum, no? For example, in home economics, no, and in several, I remember when I was in high school, I was just in charge of alam mo yun, cooking. I was in charge of, what do you call this, cross stitching and stuff like that. And while my other classmates who were men, they were taught how to do welding, they were taught how to fix things, how to I guess put together things. And even at a young age, I was already told intrinsically what I should be doing and what men should be doing. When in fact, no, at a very young age, we should be open to it, no? We should be open to women taking whatever tool making class is, or men should also be allowed to do baking and cooking classes. No, we should not be defined by these gender stereotypes, even at the young age. Next, the third thing, although quite difficult, is making sure that your mindsets and biases and stereotypes are in check. There are actually a lot of activities, and I found this online. No, there's a gender bias bingo, wherein you can actually check. I tried to answer this as well. You can check your own biases, and maybe you could do this in your own company, in your own group of friends, your own family, if you have this, no, just to keep your biases in check as well. And then next, this one, this has been, I guess, advocated by several international agencies already, wherein we have to create gender equality incentives and awards, because we've already heard sustainability awards wherein we award hotels and establishments for being sustainable. But have we heard of any awards that actually gives incentives or recognizes establishments that promote gender equality? None, right? Or very little. So I guess this is something that would also mainstream the concept of gender equality and would also recognize and improve the way that we do business and how it relates to promoting gender equality, right? And fifth would be involving men. Quite simple, no? The issue of gender equality later on, I will point out, is not just about women, but it's also a men's issue. So involving men is also definitely a necessary precondition in making sure that gender equality is actually at play. Now, what can you do if you are in the position of management position, if you're in the government, if you are someone who has a say on how the industry would go about? I guess the first thing that I would like to suggest as a researcher, as a development consultant, as a practitioner, first is to help us get data. There really is scarce, little to no data about the segregation of the aggregation of men and women who are employed in the industry. I cannot, for example, confirm whether there are more men or women working in the industry. That's how scarce the data is. So I hope that we can do something about it, because everything starts with data. We cannot assess where we are. We cannot monitor how we can improve without data saying where women are in the industry, right? Second, if and when it's possible, we have to put women in leadership positions. I remember one of my interviews with tourism officers in Cebu. They were saying that, they don't really intend to work for the government, but because they noted that the tourism secretary and their provincial government and their bosses are actually women, they realized that, women can actually lead, and that I can become them in the future. So it just basically validates the fact that when you put empowered women in positions, they can actually empower more younger women to take up their space in society as well. So yes, women in leadership positions could definitely help. Third, this again is not readily acknowledged statistically and by numbers, but unfortunately, there is a discrimination of women in terms of their ability to reproduce and their ability to create life. We see this in a lot of businesses, no, wherein they prefer men over women, because women now, when they get pregnant, when they create a family, they can no longer work. No, and again, this is a form of discrimination, in a sense that you're discriminating women just because of their ability to populate, to create life. No, so again, enhanced maternity protection is definitely necessary. And finally, just a segue of in line with the UNEP and UNWTO, UNWTO and UNEP strategy in making sure that gender equality is promoted throughout the industry, is their gender inclusive strategy for tourism businesses. So I'll show it to you here in the next slide. So you can actually go just type it in Google, and you can download this if you are a business owner. They also have the public counterpart of this if you are in the government. So they also created a manual on how you can promote gender equality in your own workplace. So basically, the entire manual talks about how step by step you can actually promote gender equality, and how you can create your own you can assess your company or organization on whether or not you are gender equal or not, right? So again, this is a step ahead towards making sure that our own biases, our own businesses are in check in terms of promoting gender equality. So you can easily Google this, and I believe there could be a separate initiative that could specifically talk about how we can apply this platform to our own businesses and to our own workplaces, right? And given the benefit of the time, to end my presentation, I'd like to talk about the final thing. Gender equality, I was talking to several practitioners. No, it's been there. It's an issue that's been there for years now, even when I wasn't born yet. It's an issue already. But come to think of it, rarely do we see webinars and discussions that talks about this topic. Now, even in the Philippines, when I was doing my research, it was so hard to look for data. It was so hard to look for studies that already talk about gender equality in the industry. And why is it so, right? I think there are a lot of reasons, but pointing to you why why it remains to be important to continuously talk about this topic. No, why you, for example, if you're an organization, why you have to continuously talk about this topic, there are actually a lot of reasons. And let me summarize it into three senses. First, it's common sense. It's important to talk about gender equality because of common sense. Common sense because common sense, half of the world's population are actually women. 49.58% of the population are women. And if we talk about human rights, no, half of the world's population also common sense deserves human rights in the same way as men does. Right? So it's common sense that we have to fight for the human rights of also the half of the population. Second, it makes sustainable sense because in reality, you cannot achieve whatever sustainable, inclusive tourism development you may have on your flagship programs without equality. If people are not equal, regardless of their gender, their sexual orientation, there is no such thing as inclusive, people-centric, and sustainable development. So equality as a prerequisite is a precondition to achieving sustainable development. And finally, it makes business sense. Imagine if you are not employing half of the population just because of their women, right? You're already wasting half of the economic resources that you might have used to improve the economic activities in your community, in your society. And McKinsey and Company even put a number to it, saying that globally, if we are able to narrow the gender gap, it could add between 12 to 8 to 28 trillion dollars to the global GDP. And this is the money, this is the profit that we are all wasting just because we're not addressing the issue of gender inequality in societies, right? And most importantly, because gender equality makes common sense, makes sustainable sense, and because it makes business sense, most importantly, it is an issue that is not just for women. The next time you talk to someone and they tell you, I don't care about gender equality because I'm a man, because I'm not a feminist, or whatnot, because they're not women, prove them wrong, because gender equality is not just for women. Whether you're a she, a he, a they, no, you're all humans. We're all humans. And this is a cause for concern for everyone. And at the end of the day, gender equality is not just for the minority, but it's also for everyone. It's for the people. And with that, that ends my presentation. And I hope you've learned something from this quick discussion. And I look forward to your questions in our interaction later on towards the end of this session. So thank you very much. It's a pleasure to speak to you about something that I'm very passionate about. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ayla, for setting the tone of this webinar. That was super empowering, actually. And thank you for highlighting several more burning questions that we should ask ourselves about women in the tourism workforce, for emphasizing that women's work should actually improve their self-perception, should be employed in work that make them feel empowered, right? So I've also learned more about the different challenges that women experience, such as what you've mentioned, the gender wage gap, the glass ceilings, and of course, being underpaid. So hopefully we can be enlightened by additional long-term solutions or, for example, policy approaches that will be provided by our next speaker. So thank you again very much, Ayla, for that wonderful presentation. For our second speaker, she will be talking about integrating gender perspective in policy approaches. She is the founder and president of Fora Communications, a strategic communications consulting firm specializing in visibility policy and public advocacy communications. She is also an independent consultant on gender and development, and a member of the fourth batch of Gender and Development Resource Pool certified by the Philippine Commission on Women. She graduated from the University of the Philippines, Diliman, with a degree of Bachelor of Arts in English, major in creative writing, and is currently finishing her master's degree in Women and Development program at UP Diliman's College of Social Work and Community Development. As principal at Fora Communications, and as a certified independent GAD consultant, she provides consulting services to private, local, and global organizations and companies, government agencies, and donor agencies on content development, communication strategy, editorial, research, and crisis communication around advocacy and policy, especially in the areas of gender development, social inclusion, and good governance. She also serves as resource speaker and training facilitator for various government agencies on such specialized themes as legal mandates and communication. So everyone, please welcome Attorney Allen Liberato Espino. So Attorney, you have the floor po.
Thank you, Andrea. Good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here. I think they will share my presentation. Okay, let's just wait for them to pull up my presentation. Yeah, thank you very much. So I have maybe 13 slides here. I will try to keep also within the 15-minute time. No? Sige. So I'm supposed to talk about how to integrate gender perspectives in policy approach. So, but before we go into the meat of the subject, so to speak, I want us to align muna on what do we mean by gender. Can you move to the next slide, please? So when we say gender, what do we mean ba, no? What do we associate with gender? So simply put, no, gender is actually a system by which our society organizes males and females into distinct categories. So parang you're creating two columns, no? One column is male and one column is female. And then under that column, the society assigns to males and females yung appropriate roles and activities. And at the same time, society is also imposing on them what is appropriate in terms of their behavior, no, in terms of other standards. So that's that's basically the simplest way to explain what gender is. No? So kaya when you say gender equality, for example, this means men and women being equal regardless of how the society organizes or assigns standards and norms or assigns roles and responsibilities to males and females. So ano naman ibig sabihin natin? What do we mean when we say gender perspective? Let's go to the next slide, please. So when we say gender perspective, this is coming from the idea that males and females are distinguished by the society. No, that's what we call gender differentiation. And society imposes this distinction actually very, very strictly. No, so that for example, when we talk about SOGI, trans are judged by the society specifically because they are not complying with the standards or the expectations of society based on the sex that they are assigned at birth. No? So kaya so when we say gender perspective, this is actually recognizing that because society distinguishes males and females, the policies that we create, the programs that we implement in our work, for example, or in our LGUs, for example, may impact them differently because at the start, we recognize right away that they have differential situations. Women are situated differently than men because that's how society organizes women and men. Also, and as such, because there is an innate and inherent subordination of women are relegated to a secondary status. We also know, having that gender perspective, that the policies and programs that come out of our offices need to address women's needs and interests. Why do we need to address them? Why do we need to take that extra step? Because otherwise, the impact that we have, that our policies and programs will have on women and men will not be equal as well. Diba? Because they're not because they're starting not on an equal footing. So that's why you have to take that extra step. And that's basically what gender perspective is now, realizing and recognizing that to begin with, women are not at an equal footing with men. So that meron ka dapat, you have to add that extra ingredient so that at the end of the day, your policies and programs will benefit them equally. Okay, so that's gender perspective in a nutshell. So next slide, please. Yeah, so to illustrate what gender perspective in policies is, no, I try to locate where gender is in the Tourism Act of 2009. I'm not sure if you read this, but it's a pretty long policy. No, so we think no, it might have been, and it was of course enacted in 2009. So it might have uh, supposedly benefited from the gender perspective, no, that we have been talking about for decades already. So, but if you look at the Tourism Act of 2009, gender is located only in one provision. Next slide, please. That's in section 3, titled objectives. No? So it says there, particularly section 3E, one of the objectives is to ensure that tourism development protects and promotes the general well-being of the Filipino people, particularly in the area of investment, to include monitoring and prevention of any act of profiteering or speculation to the detriment of local residents, as well as, so dun lang makikita, no? So the last part of that provision, as well as the exploitation of women and children in tourism. Okay, so, but are we just, when we say gender equality, are we just talking about gender-based violence? No, when we say integrating gender perspectives, is it enough, no, to recognize that the issue affecting women is limited to gender-based violence? No, no, kasi there are a lot of issues, no, that are affecting women. There are a lot of issues that are resulting from the unequal position and unequal status of women in men. Some of these are, next slide, please. Okay, so just a rundown, no, of the things that, of the manifestations of gender biases. For example, we have subordination. In the tourism industry, according to data that was provided in the brief, no, for this webinar, women tend to be concentrated in the lowest paid and lowest status jobs in tourism. So although, for example, globally, no, more than half of tourism workers are women, although in the Philippines it's less than half. No, if you locate them, you will find them in the margins, diba? So they tend to be concentrated on in the lowest paid and lowest status of the tourism industry. We also see marginalization. Female labor force participation in Philippine tourism lags behind its regional peers, no, at 46%, according to 2018 data. So again, no, there is an issue of not just where they are, but how productive they are, how much they're contributing to the economy. So that's marginalization and economic. It's an economic gender bias. And then we also have multiple burden. The previous speaker talked about this kanina. Yung because the society exclusively assigns care work, no, yung housework, taking care of the family, taking care of their kids, doing all the housework, aside from the productive work, when they intend to, for example, contribute to the the finances of the household. What happens is that they are trapped, in a situation where they have to do double days or double shifts na tinatawag, because of course, yung keeping the household is a full-time job. No? So if you go out and try to be productive, try to contribute to the economy or the finances of the household, that's another job. That's another full-time job. And yun nga, if you decide to, for example, contribute to the community pa, so that adds to the burden. So we call that multiple burden. And then you also have stereotyping. When we say stereotyping, the best maybe way to illustrate this is, trying to find where women are in the tourism sector. Most of the time you will find them in the services, in services jobs. And that's because these jobs are actually an extension of the gender roles that they are stereotypically assigned. So those are many things, no? And that's a lot to think about, and that's a lot to actually a lot of opportunities, no, to make policies more gender responsive than just looking at gender-based violence. Next slide, please. Yeah. So what we're saying is that there is a gender dimension to policy making. So unfortunately, and I'm speaking because I have had the opportunity to teach and to train legislative staff on how to create gender responsive legislation. So unfortunately, we are used to seeing policies that are, they say, gender neutral, or gender equal because they apply equally to both women and men. So, but again, is that really gender neutral when we say something, a piece of policy or a program, for example, is applicable to both women and men? That's not gender neutral when you consider the fact that to begin with, women are at an equal footing, at a subordinate position, at a secondary status than men. So that is the gender dimension that we're trying to integrate, into policy making. When you say that a policy is applicable to both women and men equally, that is actually gender blind. If it does not provide for mechanisms to offset the inherent limitations and vulnerabilities of women. So pag sinabing gender neutral, that's actually gender blind, because now we're seeing, from a fresh perspective, that hindi pwedeng one size fits all, because the problems and the issues of women and men are different because the society makes them different and distinguishes one from the other. So it's just like, next slide please, it's just like when you're trying to fill glasses of water, diba? So if your end game, or if your end goal, next slide please. Yeah, so if your end goal is to have like 5 glasses of water glasses filled with water, but you'll have and you begin with um uh, may water na, at various levels. You begin by looking at how much water there is to begin with, diba? And then you add as much as it takes to fill all of them. So if a policy is made applicable to both women and men without consideration for their unequal positions, what you do is actually put an equal amount of water in all the glasses without looking at how much they need to get filled. So that's how we see it. That's how applying gender perspectives in policymaking works. So you take stock of what's there, and then based on that knowledge, based on that awareness, of the gaps that are gender based, you fill the gaps through policies. Yeah. Next slide, please. Okay, so how do we empower women through policies? I think this is taking off also from the very, very nice presentation and informative presentation of the previous speaker. So when we talk about empowering women, this is the long way framework on the levels of gender equality and empowerment. So how do we craft, or how do we even look at the substance of a policy when we're making one? So there are several ways to look at it, and beyond gender equality, I think it's about time that we see as a challenge, yung how do we empower women? There's a big difference, between gender equality and women's empowerment. Okay, so gender equality is like basically opening the doors, to women and men. But the question is, will both women and men get to the door? Will they be able to access that opportunity? And that's where women's empowerment comes in. You have to make sure that you not only open the doors both to women and men, but you also make sure that the women will get to where the door is, and will actually be able to access that opportunity. And parang I see it like as a race, For example, if you're organizing a marathon, diba? So what do? You say, okay, my marathon is open to both women and men. Okay. So, but then you have that's gender equality. But women's empowerment means that you make sure that the women are able to join, actually the are able to get to the venue, and everyone is able to also reach the finish line. No? That's women's empowerment. No? That's making sure that you equip women with the power to change their own status and to change their own living conditions. So there are five levels of women's empowerment that we can try to achieve, no, in our policies. Welfare, of course, no, making sure that they have access to their material needs, access, making sure that they have access to resources, no, economic resources most especially. Conscientization is making sure that they understand, no, their own status, and which will, of course, when you understand that you are in a subordinate position, you will want to get out of that, and you want to change your own living conditions. Participation, yeah, making sure that there is space for women to participate in decision-making processes. And then you control, of course, no, making sure that women are able to make decisions, no, that are binding and that are respected by the community on, you know, their lives, their bodies, and all the other aspects that are affecting their lives. So empowering women through policies means making trying to see, you know, how can my policy achieve these levels of empowerment. No? And of course, no, the also the idea is that if you try to reach for the higher levels of power, um, empowerment, I mean, you're also addressing the issues below in the lower levels of empowerment. So can I, for example, make space for women to participate, in decision making, in the, whether in the workplace or in our LGU, for example? Kaya ko bang, can I, for example, educate them, make them gender sensitive so that they understand that gender norms need to be changed, no? So that they can also pursue, you know, their own well-being, their own fulfillment in life. Yeah. So, but where do we start in policy making? There are areas that need to be focused on. Check next slide, please. So, what are these areas? Now, I have three that I wanted to recommend, no, if you're looking at creating policies, no, that will promote gender equality and women's empowerment in the tourism sector. The first one is women's economic empowerment. So this is data from the 2022 Gender Gap Index. No, nag-slide yung Philippines from 17th to 19th place. And if you look at the four indicators, the four indicators are education, health, women's economic empowerment, and political participation. So, yung women's economic empowerment, may gap pa rin tayo. There's still a gap. There remains to be a gap, although we are high up, no, in terms of ranking. So, but again, no, there is still something to address. No, there are rooms for improvement. So, when talking about policies, no, there are questions that might be able to guide us, no, in crafting policies with a gender perspective. First, no, how can policies make more spaces for women to be economically productive in the tourism sector? So how can we make spaces for them, no, to contribute economically to the sector? Not only that, no, how do we ensure that as they contribute, no, they do so also through decent work? No? Kasi, for example, no, if you look at the informal economy, that's dominated by women. So how can we make sure that the opportunities that we create for women are of decent work and may sustainability and stability? And then how they also put in place mechanisms to offset their inherent limitations and vulnerabilities, including, for example, their vulnerability to gender-based violence, their vulnerability to discrimination based on, you know, their being able to create life, so to speak, sabi nga no previous speaker. Yeah, so that's one area, no, women's economic empowerment. The next area is gender balance. No, can we apply the concept of affirmative action? So policies force institutions to create opportunities for women's participation. What do we mean by affirmative action? No? There is a concept in the Magna Carta of Women, no, whereby it mandates um, agencies, no, to it forces agencies to create spaces, to create opportunities for women to actually get into decision making positions. No, for example, there's the quota provisions that we have, no, which forces institutions to increase yung mga women in third level positions incrementally every year. So can we also apply that concept, no, so that our policies, whether it's a work policy or it's an LGU policy, no, the institution is forced, no, to make opportunities for women's participation. Also, how do we support women so they have equal opportunities to rise up to decision making positions, given their multiple burdens and stereotypical roles, di ba? So we see in the picture, di ba? Kunyari, career. We're talking about career advancement. But there are a lot of burdens for women to advance professionally. And that's because, no, the society has assigned to them roles that are exclusively for them. Roles that are rarely that they are rarely able to to shift, no, or to assign to other people or to their male counterpart. So how do we make sure that women are supported despite all these multiple burdens and stereotypical roles? And then finally, another focus area. Next slide, please. Of course, ito pa rin, no, gender-based violence is a persistent gender issue. As tourism industry players, now how can our policies integrate women's and children's protection? Because we know naman for a fact that they are the ones who are vulnerable to trafficking and sexual exploitation. But as tourism develops, now there will always be an increase also in the vulnerability of women and children. So how do we link up with communities and state service providers so that tourism development won't need to have women and children as collateral damage? So as we pursue development in the tourism sector, dapat the perspective of women and children being vulnerable to sexual exploitation and trafficking should always be there. So it should be integrated in any policy that promotes the tourism industry. Next slide, please. Ayan. So what is the challenge that I want to leave to everybody? Can we be gender responsive in policy making? No? So in making policies, can we recognize gender issues? No? Can we make it the point, no, that our policies are informed of this awareness, no, that women and men are situated differently, and that women are at a subordinate and unequal position than men. Okay, so how do we can we make sure, no, that the policies not only recognize this but also address, no, yung mga gender issues that are arising out of this unequal position? And then, of course, the bigger challenge is, no, can we be gender transformative in our policies? In making policies, can we contribute to changes in gender norms? Because that is the only key for, I don't know, towards gender equality, changing norms, changing the structure, changing the culture. No? So can we, in our policies, try to address, no, the roots of gender inequalities and discrimination? It's a long shot, no, but having these types of conversations opens up opportunities for identifying what's wrong, no, and trying to see how in our little way or in our big way, you know, we can contribute to making things right. I think that's the end of my presentation. Ayan, thank you very much for this opportunity. I look forward to your questions then in the open forum.
Thank you so much, Attorney Allen, for that wonderful presentation. So I guess we really should take more steps talaga to recognize the fact that women are not on equal footing as men, as Attorney has said, and there is no such thing as one size fits all when it comes to policy making. No? So we've also learned that women's empowerment is all about women actually being able to join the marathon. And it was also very interesting to see that the pyramid levels on welfare, access, conscientization, I'm not sure if I got that right, participation and control. And also, so I hope that we would be able to integrate these levels and address those focus areas in the future, not just in policy, but in business, community, and culture as well. So thank you very much for that great presentation, Attorney. So, for our final speaker, she will be tackling the role of women in disaster risk management. She is a consultant for Sweden's 1 million housing project, We Affect International Philippines, since 2020. She is also the lead researcher writer for Women and Environment in the Beijing Platform for Action on Women at the UP Center for Women's Studies in Diliman. She is currently the treasurer and part of the board of directors of the Institute for Philippines Cooperatives and Social Enterprises, Inc. since 2018. She is also the co-convener of UNFPA subcluster for gender-based violence, watch groups for humanitarian action since 2017, and part of the board of directors for Concern Philippines since 2016. She has attended various international and local trainings, workshops, and conferences related to green programs or projects, women and gender issues, movement building and governance, as well as solidarity, people's economy advocacies. So please welcome Ms. Met Jimenez, Secretary General of Sarilaya, an organization of women development catalysts committed to promote women's empowerment and gender equality. So Ms. Met, you may have the floor po.
Hello, good morning. Good afternoon, everyone. Ako, I just came from the hospital. Tumas ang aking BP. But anyway, I'm joining you for this afternoon. Yung presentation ko, hindi ko na na-forward. And I don't think I'll be able to open my video because napaka-fluctuating ng signal dito. Baka mawala pa ako. Right now, I'm in Bacolod, out of town for a conference with partners. And I'm so happy to be with you and discuss something about transforming tourism value chains in the Philippines. Now, I actually have one thing in mind na in-infuse ko dito sa role ng women in terms of disaster risk management. I added, I am so passionate of understanding solidarity tourism that will enhance the role of women in disaster risk reduction and management. Dahil sa trend ng ating tourism, which is actually, if we put that context of the Philippines in Asia-Pacific region, ay talagang one of the world's most disaster-prone area, no? Tapos, dito pa rin naman yung napakagagandang mga lugar na hindi mo makikita at gustong-gusto ng mga turista, our white beaches, our Boracay, my place in Puerto Galera, beautiful falls, caves. These things are all in Asia Pacific, and they're so much, very often visited by calamities and disasters, bukod pa doon sa talagang natural. Pero when I say we wanted to put forward solidarity tourism as a new, maybe an emerging, as against the traditional capital-based tourism na napaka-intensive na mga investments ng ating mga foreigners. I'd like to put side by side the role of women in disaster management with the concept of solidarity tourism. Hindi na ako masyado nakapagpaalam nito, but I'll be happy to share this with you sa context na ang women talaga, with their extensive knowledge of communities, yung kaninang binabanggit ng ating mga speakers, yung social roles of managing natural environment resources, tapos napaka-caring, yung caring responsibilities nila na we end up multiple burdened, and these increasingly play, a very critical role in disaster risk management, especially in times of disaster and calamities. Ang women sa ganitong katangian ay we call them first responders. Sila yung unang nakatingin dun sa mga babies, mga infants, and their elderly. So dahil nga household managers ang ating mga nanay, ang ating mga ate, ang ating mga tiya, ang ating mga lola, talagang nasa kanilang natural na consciousness yung sila yung unang mag-respond in terms of emergencies at saka in terms of disasters, no? And another point is empowering women is actually the key to strengthening disaster resilience of communities and managing all sorts of calamities and disasters. But why solidarity tourism? Why introduce this thing? Because this is actually, for me, solidarity tourism, central goal is the creation of economic opportunities for local community. At dito malakas ang turismo, no? Sa nakaraang mga dekada ay very extraordinary ang pag-grow ng sector na to, lalo na sa world economy, and also it is also rapidly transforming. So parang ang tingin natin, ako in particular, can we reset the industry for solidarity advocacy as a paradigm, no? At i-advocate natin strongly ang gender equality and women empowerment. As I said, andi dito sa solidarity tourism yung malakas na positive cultural exchange between guests and hosts, through one-on-one interaction, mas personalized ang mga dating nito, at they're also serious in terms of protection the environment, advocating for climate emergencies, and then the preservation of our historical accounts. When one of the speaker said something about conscientization, naka-envelope ito para sa akin sa solidarity tourism. I'm so happy to hear conscientization element, no? It's an important element in solidarity advocacy. Now, kahit yung United Nations Environment Program already presented an 80% ng mga revenues natin ay sa turismo, sa industriya of typical all-inclusive kung holidays ito na didistribute sa airlines, sa hotel chains, sa mga international companies, at hindi siya na iiwan sa region. So umaalis yung mga pera, konti ang naiiwan sa mga local communities, no? Kaya I think we should probably get to think yung mga kawimena natin, yung mga communities natin should get a fair share of the income of the sector's money that's coming in, generated, so that would in fact, no, help our women and our locals manage their disaster program. In terms of preparedness, malaki din ang investment natin para dyan. Marami din tayong kailangang mga technology at saka mga preparations, ano. At ngayon nga na nasa pandemic era tayo, we need to ensure the public health and safety protocols as primary focus, no? National and local governments should help our destinations to reopen safely, to provide clear guidance on safety measures, to ensure consumers and visitors regain confidence in travel, while keeping safety also our host communities and gender inclusive workers. At I want to talk about fair trade justice for the communities, lalo na kung ang isang mga aftermath ng turismo, yung ating nakaraan, ang dami nating pollutions, ang daming waste, ang daming nasisira. There's a way that the community should be able to manage a community-based tourism program that has solidarity in its heart, no? Why? Back to that gender thing, marami tayong dapat tingnan na key facts ng gender issues, especially in times of disaster, no? Kasi nakita na natin may mga pre-existing structural gender inequalities. It affects women and girls in different ways than and they affect boys and men, no? And the vulnerability of females increases also when they are in a lower socioeconomic group, particularly in the Philippines and in the global South. This actually, this vulnerability impacts preparedness, evacuation, response, at yung recovery natin, ano, most of that is left to women in the households and in the communities. And the reasons for this vulnerability can really be traced, ano, to the roles discussed earlier by the speakers, ano, yung stereotyping at yung mga cultural norms where they live. This includes duties of women and girls that they carry out. At kung minsan, tama yung binanggit kanina, no, minsan yung mga pananamit, pagdating sa disaster, hindi madaling makatakbo ang mga kababaihan, hindi madaling makaalis agad sa lugar ng sakuna, lalo na kung sila nagre-responde rin, ano? And also sometimes the way to behave, pagka may mga responses or emergencies in times of disaster. Itong mga vulnerability nito ay kumbaga tawagin na nating gendered impact of disasters, no? At sa ibang mga bansa nga meron pang issue ng women and girls of color, no, na nagiging problema. At ito ay now this reflects also yung impact ng poverty, yung challenge ng healthcare, paano ito ma-access, yung even reduce access to education and employment opportunities, of the same work, sometimes of the same work, in the industry. So if we think yung preparedness, yung before a disaster, we will see that women and girls usually have primary responsibility for caring, katulad ng nabanggit natin kanina. Itong care industry are not paid industry, no? Pagdating sa turismo. At yun ay pagdating din sa pangyayari sa mga nangyayari mga sakuna sa ating kalagayan sa ating mga communities, no? So these women and girls takes care of their older family members, lalo na yung may disabilities. Yung caregiving responsibility na to ay may prevent also their ability to immediately evacuate kung merong mga disasters. And sinasabi natin na they're even the last, to look into the things that should be taken care of. Lalo na kung ito'y may kinalaman sa food security at sa mga kung ano-ano pa mga dati nilang ginagawa. And if the main breadwinner during disaster is killed or becomes a casualty, women often need to seek outside employment, no? Especially sa konteksto na minsan they have to get or drop out from school to take care of the household, and sometimes more very more very promising opportunities they have to give away, because of the kind of situations and mind setting. Another thing is, in all countries, or not, the Philippines is not an exemption, yung violence against women and girls is a factor post-disaster, we already have recorded since Yolanda, when gender-based violence and watch groups have been organized. So we tried to develop manuals on how to group or organize watch groups. Especially ngayon, mayroong carding, may mga deployments na pwedeng ipadala dyan, yung mga trained nating gender-based violence na watch groups, so that yung mga physical abuse, including human trafficking, na nag-i-increase after disaster, ay hindi lang ma-monitor, kung hindi ma-respondihan din natin in terms of service and rescue operations sometimes, andyan din yung intimate partner violence perspective na nangyayari in times of disaster, from stress due to financial concerns, disaster trauma heightened by mental health issues, na nagkakaroon ito ng meron para tayong mga drug-related, na nakakapasok dyan, nakakasingit. So ang sexual violence also occur, in crowded housing situations. At ito ay exacerbated sa mga temporary shelters, sa mga housing evacuation centers. Nagkakaroon tayo dito nagkakaroon ng mga nai-exhibit na mga aggressive behavior, na kalimitan ay sexual ang aggression. Sa mga conflict naman na mga communities, in terms of mga conflict war-torn communities, meron tayong mga problema sa mga refugee encampments. Isa yon sa mga dapat din na tinitingnan natin, na nagiging lalo na itong mga internally displaced persons natin sa mga kampo nila. Andyan din yung sexual violence na often seen as a means of control pagdating dun sa mga communities na nagsasama-sama sa mga encampment. Sa ating cultural communities, we will notice, parang marami sa kanila ngayon ay nata-traffic na after a disaster, at nakakalungkot yun, kasi yung ating mga cultural communities ay halos even our Muslim communities ay nahihirapang bumalik sa mga lugar kung saan merong mga na damage na mga communities. So they're having a hard time recovering because of the kind of work that is available for the families also, na hindi agad makaresponde ang gobyerno kung minsan, lalo na dun sa mga shelters na they are forced to leave, Now this kind of disparities na distinct ay recorded na lahat, and we are going to encourage more understanding at analysis siguro para pagdating sa pag-handle ng mga ganitong kaproblemahan. Why did we say reset the industry? Lalo na kung paano mag-recover ang isang tourism destination, na kung saan nabanggit ko kanina, yung disaster impacts are not gender neutral, nandun na yon. Marami dyan ay mga babae din ang namamatay pagka may sakuna. yung mga existing gender roles na can change in disaster settings, at yung ating mga gendered response that can reduce long-term social consequences. Mahalaga yon dahil kailangan pagsumikapan din natin yung data, yung binanggit kanina ng mga previous speaker natin. Ang ating data ay hindi pa talaga ganun kasino, hindi siya disaggregated, at mahirap magplano, lalo na kung ipapackage natin at ilalagay natin ng isang programa kung saan ang women natin ay agents of change for disaster risk reduction and strengthening resilience ng ating mga communities. So, gusto ko lang pong kanina may binanggit din ng ating speaker tungkol dun sa analysis, ang assessment. Napaka-importante nun dahil yung gender audit and analysis that gives also in putting forward solidarity tourism and in trying to portray our women as managers in terms of disaster management, or resiliency. We need to understand in the gender analysis frame that the very important yung empowerment component, dahil nandoon yung relationship between females and males and their access to and control of resources, at ano yung mga constraints that they face relative to each other in, let's say, community-based tourism program na nagkakaroon ng mga ganitong humaharap sa maraming mga sakuna o kalamidad. Yung gender analysis natin should be integrated into an all-sector assessment also, na nakapagbibigay sa atin ng isang situational analysis na mag-i-ensure na yung ating gender-based injustices and inequalities are not exacerbated by interventions na nandoon sa industriya ng turismo. So we would need more promotions of a relations that is fair, na pakikinabangan ng ating mga pangunahin dito yung ating mga kababaihan, Kaya if we wanted to probably design a gender strengthening for disaster resiliency, kailangan natin ding makita ano yung trend ng national level, na ang hinapan ng solidarity tourism na community-based. Ang anchor ng women pagdating sa community-based ay nagiging malakas kung ang programa ay napaka-enabling. So yung mga policies na naka-frame, sa pag-enable sa kanila na ito ay gender inclusive, at ang capacity building ng project management ay makikitang ang laki ng kanilang magiging masusulisit, na gain out of what is going on in their community, especially pag ang mga community programs ng turismo ay may kinalaman sa ecotourism, pag may kinalaman sa foreign food security promotions, may kinalaman sa community-based health program na pwedeng i-advocate with solidarity with the guests and visitors coming in. So, yung mga cooperative design na ang tingin ko nagiging komportable ang ating mga women, ay pwedeng i-integrate yung preparedness sa sa Solidarity Tourism Program. At magiging very at home sila dito dahil may kasanayan sila doon sa kapaligiran at magiging komportable din sila to provide the conditions that our guests who are coming to visit them, our tourists who are willing to share the visions of community development, and who are willing also to internalize safety and disaster preparedness formula that are also with the guidance of the national policy are adopted by women-led disaster management program that is tourism in transformative in a way. So I'd like to say in closing that while tourism is largely a private sector activity, it needs to be enabled by a complex web of policy, of regulation, including infrastructure investments by our government, of course, that is empowering and gender inclusive. Gender inclusive na ang laki ng leadership role ng ating mga kawimenan in trying to portray that they can be relied on in terms of managing disaster. And that sa mga nakaraan lessons learned natin sa disasters, women-led reform and recovery initiatives sa pagbagsak din ng turismo after the pandemic, katakot-takot na lockdown, ay mapapagkatiwalaan natin ang ini-envision ng ating mga locals to have immediate long-term and far-reaching consequences for the industry. And yung mga opportunities emerging with good business leverage para sa ating mga visitors and consumers ay masuportahan ang ating solidarity paradigm to catalyze sustainable tourism, and that putting that tourism industry in the hands of our women in the locals, magkaroon to ng mas sustainable trajectory, ma-enhance at ma-step out ang community engagement na nandito na naka-include ang ating disaster management that is beneficial to all. So with that, I'd like to say thank you for having me.
Okay, thank you so much, Ms. Smith, and thank you for joining us, even though your BP spiked up and hopefully na-stabilize na po. Thank you so much po, Ms. Smith. To be honest, the first time we met po, the Solidarity Tourism was the first time I heard that term. So I'm really glad that we were able to learn more about it. Thank you for highlighting that in terms of disaster calamities and emergencies, women po are considered as first responders and managers. So and that, of course, they should have support, of course, from our government, and also the policies and the training that we need are gender inclusive. So we also learned from you that we have to advocate for fair trade justice and capacity building, not just for the women and the girls in our communities, but also the men. I did not realize also that gender-based violence can also result from disasters and calamities. So and also from crowded housing situations, which of course sometimes are a result of the evacuation centers and everything. So I hope that we can further cascade proper awareness and measures soon, especially how the Philippines is very vulnerable to these types of disasters. So Thank you very much po, Miss Meth, for enlightening us. So, Nina, Kim, I'm hoping if we can skip to the closing remarks so that we can still have Sir Bong to deliver them because he needs to go already, and then we can just answer a few questions after that. If I may, so wrapping up providing the closing remarks is one of our advisory group members for sustainable tourism. He joined the Philippine Hotel Owners Association as executive director in September 2021. He is a graduate of UP Diliman with a degree in BS Hotel and Restaurant Administration. He also took up his master's in business administration at the Ateneo Graduate School of Business and master's in national security administration at the National Defense College of the Philippines. He is currently enrolled in the Doctorate for Public Administration program at UP Diliman. So prior to joining FOA, he was with the DOT for 35 years, where he was involved in development planning, strategy formulation, bilateral negotiations, marketing, investments, promotion, and product development. So as executive director of FOA, he commits to advancing the advocacies of the association and making it the single and dominant voice representing private businesses in the accommodation sector. So everyone, please welcome Mr. Benito Bengzon. So Sir Bong, you have the floor.
Thank you, everyone. On behalf of the Philippine Hotel Owners Association, I wish to thank the Philippine Center for Environmental Protection and Sustainable Development Incorporated, or PSFD, for inviting me to deliver the closing remarks for this webinar. The holding of this event comes at a time we are seeing encouraging signs of recovery for Philippine tourism. The health and safety situation has greatly improved from the early months of the pandemic, and travel restrictions have now been removed. So hotels and other tourism enterprises have normalized operations and are again providing employment opportunities, including to women. So the webinar today tackled the importance of crafting policies and programs that advocate gender balance and promoting opportunities for women. We also discussed on-the-ground experiences of women empowerment and leadership in tourism. We also talked about disaster risk management, which is particularly relevant in the Philippine setting. So I hope that you found all the sessions interesting and educational. So moving forward, it is important for stakeholders to continue to push for a more gender-responsive tourism industry and create the opportunities for inclusive development. Likewise, we must strengthen our institutional capacity to develop and implement the Gender and Development or GAD framework, both in the Philippines and at the ASEAN level. So as we close this webinar, allow me to extend my warmest congratulations to PSFD for a successful event and to all the participants for your active engagement. Maraming salamat po at mabuhay.
Thank you so much, Sir Bong. We'll just have a quick picture with the organizers and with you lang po, just so that we can have documentation. Actually, if the speakers can also open their camera so that we can take a quick picture. Miss Ayla and maybe Miss Meth kung kaya lang po. Ayan, so 1, 2, 3, smile. Okay, one more. 1, 2, 3, smile. Okay. Thank you so much, Sir Bong, for taking the time. And please, ingat po kayo sa next meeting niyo po. Thank you po. Bye-bye po. Okay. So everyone, we can have some, we can entertain maybe 2 questions since medyo overtime na po tayo. So again, our sincerest apologies for the delay. I'll hand over the floor, the virtual mic to Kim for facilitating 2 to 3 questions from the audience.
Hi, thank you, Andy. So I'll be facilitating the short Q&A. So we took a little time to discuss the topics we had earlier. So right now, we'll address some of the questions from our participants. So this one can be answered by all of the speakers. So this is a little generic, but I think all-inclusive then po. Please answer short and sweet based on your expertise. So first we have, what are the best practices today of the corporate business and government, or depending on the area you're working for, in terms of implementing gender equality? So again, what are the best practices today of corporate business and government in implementing gender equality? So I guess we can start with Miss Ayla.
Hi, yes, Kim. Thank you. Siguro, I'm thinking kasi you're talking about one of the best practices, no?
Mhm.
I think the first thing that came up to my head was when I was doing my field work. I talked to several businesses, and I think the most basic and most significant of them all is that they have a policy of ensuring that they hire employees based on their capacities and skills. It's not because of any other factor, but implementing that kind of culture in the company, actually, to me, even if it's simple, it's what actually makes a lot of difference. Just making sure that you filter out that element of gender bias in the hiring process. I think that would be a good start.
Okay. Thank you, Miss Ayla. Miss Allen, your perspective po.
Yeah, oo. Sige, I'm going to speak on behalf of the government naman, no, because that's basically the agencies that I work with a lot. So I think isa sa mga best practices was the GAD budget policy. Bakit siya best practices for me? Because diba, it's one thing to have a policy, it's one thing to talk about pursuing gender equality and women's empowerment. Pero most of the time, no, the problem boils down to resources. Diba? So do we have enough budget? Do we have enough human resources to pursue this? So yung budget policy ensures, no, that your principles of pursuing gender equality and women's empowerment are supported by sufficient resources. So in that way, parang, diba, you're going to have no excuse na but to pursue and to operationalize, no, yung mga goals of gender equality and women's empowerment because you have access to sufficient resources.
Yeah, that's great to hear po. Miss Matt, are you still online po? Okay. I guess we can move on to a question posted by our participants here in Zoom. So this one is addressed to Miss Ayla, but Miss Allen, kindly also follow and answer to this since it's also one of your expertise in terms of CAD. So the question is, may I ask what are the current trends in research themes in regards with GAD in the tourism industry? Miss Ayla.
Yes, I think a very relatable question since I'm doing research on GAD in the tourism industry. So in the tourism industry outside the Philippines, a lot of people are talking about the concept of course, gender-based violence, and we're talking about empowerment and participation. But again, I think if you're from the Philippines, I believe Miss Santillana is from the Philippines naman. So I think please feel free to reach out to me if you wanted to collaborate on any research, because so far of what I'm doing, there's very little that has been conducted really on GAD and tourism in the Philippines. So I think there's a lot of work to be done. So it's a double-edged sword, a challenging work to be done, but also a lot of opportunities to carry on this research as well. So yeah.
Thank you, Miss Ayla. Over to you, Miss Allen.
Yeah, I guess ang answer ko will be more general, but I'm sure it's also applicable to the tourism industry. Now, we are seeing the trend of pursuing deeper dives into GAD and whatever particular sectors that we are involved in. Yung talagang pagsisectoralize, no, if that's even a word, nung pagtingin sa GAD. So parang there is this realization, no, that GAD is not a homogeneous concept, no, but it changes in manifestations, no, in forms or shapes as you go through one sector to the other. So and then also I think I also want to point out, no, naman yung gap in research is basically I think yung monitoring and evaluation of the impact, no, of all the GAD interventions that we have been seeing and we have been pursuing over how many decades na ba, no, since 1980s, 1970s. Parang wala pa kasing maganda or substantial impact analysis. So I guess, no, that's something that is also worth pursuing.
Yes, agree with both of your answers po. And looking forward in the next few years, 5 to 10 years, we really hope to have a more inclusive and gender balanced representation in the tourism sector. So I guess that's the question we can entertain for now. There is actually a lot more questions posted during the registration, so we might forward them to you po, so that you can provide your feedback, and then we can send them over to whoever answered that po, so that every question can be answered. Okay, that's it for now, Andy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Kim, for facilitating that. So that was a very quick open forum, and apologies again, everyone, for going over time. And to our participants, thank you for staying put talaga. It really means a lot, not just to us, but of course, also to the advocacy. Thank you also to our speakers, Miss Meth, Miss Ayla, and Attorney Allen, for a quick but still rich open forum, and for sharing your insights through your presentations. So I hope that this webinar was really able to spark that what do you call this, that drive that we need to really include more gender responsive or gender inclusive policy approaches in the tourism industry. So again, we will be sending you also this evaluation form for you to fill out. But again, thank you everyone for your time, and we'll be sending you the post training materials for your reference. So yeah, send us your feedback through the form, as Kim has mentioned. Thank you everyone for your time, and please have a good and have a good rest of the week. Thank you. Bye bye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.